One of the gunmen who shot multiple students at STEM school Highlands Ranch in May of 2019 has just been sentenced by a judge. 17-year-old Alec McKinney admitted to the various crimes, including the murder of senior Kendrick Castillo. Kendrick died while shielding his other teammates, or classmates I should say, from the gunfire. McKinney agreed to a plea agreement while the other defendant is still scheduled to stand trial in the fall. 9 News reporter Nelson Garcia has been in the courtroom. He's now live in Douglas County at the Justice Center. Nelson, what was the sentence just handed down?
Tom, Alec McKinney faced a life sentence with the eligibility for parole of 40 years. That was a minimum sentence. McKinney could have been sentenced to an additional 400 plus years on the other charges. The eventual sentence was an added 38 years to that life sentence. So Alec McKinney will serve a life sentence with the eligibility of parole for 40 years, but will have another 38 years added on to that. This is after more than 20 victims testified today about the impact of the horrible shooting. This day in court can never change.
I copy, shots fired.
Never change what happened at STEM School Highlands Ranch May 7, 2019. But this day in court will determine what happens to one of the shooters, 17-year-old Alec McKinney. We're not allowed to let you hear what happened, but McKinney told the judge, quote, "I stand by my guilty plea." More than 20 students, teachers, and parents delivered victim impact statements. Words like, "Alec McKinney stole my children's innocence." A former student said, "I lost the trust I once had in the community." One teacher told the judge, "Alec was one of my favorite students." And as each person spoke, McKinney became emotional. One of McKinney's own friends said, "He had a gun at the back of my head. He was going to shoot me." One of the shooting victims said, "My parents to this day get scared when I'm not home and they hear sirens." She said, "Mom, I don't even know where the bullets came from." A parent of a girl shot multiple times said to the judge. Impacts to the victims of McKinney. Impacts to those who knew and loved Kendrick Castillo, killed while trying to shield his classmates. One of those students said, "When I try to sleep, I still hear the gunshots, the screams. Every day I thank Kendrick Castillo for saving my life." McKinney wept. Kendrick Castillo's parents were the last ones to testify for the prosecutors. They, quote, said that they hope that McKinney burns in hell and that he is a coward. Alec McKinney himself did address the court and address the judge. McKinney said, "I don't want a lighter sentence, quote, I just want to apologize for what I have done." So, Tom, as I've mentioned, the sentence is a life sentence with an additional 38 years. We'll get clarification on that when the prosecutor comes out and talks to the media here in just a few minutes.
A lot of powerful testimony today, Nelson, specifically from the parents of Kendrick Castillo, those many classmates and teachers, but also from Alec McKinney as well, who seemed to suddenly have a very different perspective on things in that courtroom today.
Absolutely, and McKinney did offer apologies, even though he knew that that was not maybe worth that much to the people in the courtroom. But he did have some words to say, quote, "If anyone is thinking about a school shooting, get help now." McKinney said, "Don't be a coward and hide behind a gun." He did apologize directly to the Castillos, saying, quote, "What I have done is unforgivable. I ripped away your lives. I pray to Kendrick. I dream about him." So there's certainly some powerful words on both sides of this.
All right, Nelson, thanks very much.